is one variety. Ocimum sanctum is a common plant that is used, like if you go into an herb shop, Ocimum sanctum is often the plant that is used. And we'll talk interchangeably about Ocimum sanctum, which is the Krishna variety, and the Ocimum verticillum, which is the Vana variety, which is what I have. So this is Tulsi, or also commonly called holy basil, or sacred basil. Its origin is in India, and it has a long history of use by Ayurvedic practitioners, but it really grows anywhere in the eastern tropical regions. It's aromatic, so if you smell it, it smells amazing. Wish I could let it float through the phone right to you because it smells really good. Sometimes I like to just come out and rub the leaves and smell them just to be able to take a deep breath and relax into my body and be present. It's related to culinary basil that many of you have on your pizzas or in sauces, or if you're fortunate enough to grow in Florida. I want to say thank you to my wonderful partner for being the camera person today. You won't see his face. It's where he prefers to be, is the support person back there. But we are discovering what it's like for him to video for me and working out some hand gestures. So if you see me like question mark, that means I need more information about that head gesture. And if you have any questions as I go along, he'll be happy to relay them over to me. And welcome. Talking about Tulsi. So the parts used for this plant are the flowering tops and the leaves. Some of the sources that I've read say any aerial parts. And I have it growing in my garden here. So you can see that aerial parts could be a lot of plant material, and I really try to stick with the healthy, happy-looking leaves whenever I'm utilizing it for tea or anything else. This plant could be warming and drying. Some people like to simply eat the leaves, which I like to do. It's been historically used for mouth health. I just like to chew on it. The flavor is really similar to eating basil, culinary basil. The leaves on both the Krishna variety and the Vana, which is this one, are a little thicker and kind of hairy, but not really. They're just a little bit fuzzy. So the flavor in the Vana variety is a little bit like licorice. So if you like licorice, then go for the Vana variety. If you prefer not having that so much in your life, then the Ocimum sanctum will be the best for you if you're going into a seed store or herb store to pick out Tulsi for your life. Tulsi is in the Lamiaceae family, so that's the mint family, which means that it has a square stem that you can see up close. Nice square stem. It has antiviral properties, antibacterial, antifungal, and it's been found to enhance general immune response. So it's a wonderful cootie fighter to have on hand. And I feel like its best cootie fighting ability is that it's also an adaptogen. Now, adaptogen is a relatively new term in the field of herbalism and popular culture. It really was a term developed in the 1950s in studying Olympic athletes, where they were trying to find ways to support people and being able to use the most of their physical, mental skills. Basically, an adaptogen means that it helps your body return to homeostasis. So that's pretty much anyone, right? We live in a world that our bodies really weren't designed to know about all of the things that are happening all over the world all the time. Our bodies are really designed to know what's happening in our own lives. And many of us are experiencing a level of stress that is abnormal currently, but even a month ago, our bodies were exposed to more stress than we're necessarily designed for. So we're spending a lot more time in that sympathetic reaction where our bodies are stressed. And incorporating things like adaptogens can be really helpful in helping your body to rest and repair from those stressful moments in your life. Whether it's getting cut off on I-4 or teaching a class or being a nurse in the world. And I find that Tulsi is like a yoga class in a cup. And what that means to me is that it really helps me find that grounded, centered place that I feel like I can respond to whatever's happening in life in a more full way. So tea. Growing Tulsi. Super easy to grow. So this plant I received in a little tiny yogurt cup from a student 4 or 5 years ago. And I put it into the ground, and at that time there were a lot of other plants in our garden that you might see in a traditional culinary garden, things like tomatoes or cucumbers. And since then we've really headed more towards a permaculture approach to working in our garden, where there are plants that are of medicinal or edible that we just have access to year-round. Tulsi or holy basil is one of them. This plant grows so prolifically that it seeded itself there and here and has really become a part of our backyard. So I have access to it almost any time of the year. It really prefers Florida summers with the heat and the water. You may or may not be able to tell right now, but it has not enjoyed the colder snaps as much as I have in recent months. Oh, there's a little ladybug. The little ladybug remind me that today is my mom's birthday. I feel like my mom's here saying hi, and I can say to her hi here. Hope she's out there watching. Happy birthday, Mom. So, Tulsi, or holy basil, grows really easily here in Central Florida. It probably wouldn't like climates that's got colder than maybe Gainesville or North Florida. You could try growing it in a pot and moving it inside. Just like any other plant in the mint family, you will just want to make sure it has enough water. Part of the unhappiness that the Tulsi is experiencing now is that it's been really dry, and I typically don't water plants unless they are really, really thirsty. One of my herbal teachers said that plants that experience a little bit of challenge will actually be stronger medicine for you. So Tulsi we have year round, and you can grow it either from cutting. All the mint plants in the mint family pretty much you can grow from a cutting, and that means that you would just take a super sharp tool, just like humans, and surgery, you want to make sure that you're being as gentle with the plant skin as possible, and that you find a spot that is ready to grow. And if you look at the stem on the plant, anywhere that you see these little nodules, usually near your leaves, are places where it's ready to grow. And so if I'm taking a cutting, I would cut just below that. Say thank you, Tulsi. And then remove most of the leaves. Be a yummy snack in a little while. If you're rooting, you want to make sure that you are removing anything that the plant doesn't need to survive. So this plant would need a couple of leaves, but the rest of these I could remove, and then I would put this in water. You just want to make sure you don't have any leaves below the water. Any container will work. You want to make sure your water level is above those little nodules that we noticed were places where it could grow and either root or send leaves out. You want to make sure those are below the water, and you want to make sure no leaves are below the water. Okay? So that's from cutting. I get about an 80% result if I try to grow it from cutting. I find that growing from seed is really the easiest method that I have. So
I could just, okay, go ahead.
All these beautiful trees.
You have 30 viewers.
So Tulsi has these beautiful flowers that will give you seed heads. And sometimes I will just give this to a friend and say, shake it over your dirt and you'll get holy basil. And this variety, the Ocimum gratissimum, or the Vana variety, grows much easier here in Central Florida. The Krishna is much lower to the ground, and it's really happy during our summers, but it really doesn't like our winters. So anytime I've tried to grow it, it's been a little unhappy during the winters here. It just gets a little too cold. But the Vana gets taller, so I have access to more of those wonderful leaves.
Do you want to show them the Vana up closer?
Oh yeah, so this Vana is the same plant. That might be the same. This is also Vana. You can tell that
Just trying to reconnect. Go ahead.
Really happy right here in the middle of my yard. It gets lots of sunshine in the middle of the day, but it's shaded in the morning and the evening. And thanks to a sway that is dug nearby, any water or rain that happens brings it right over to that Vana for us.
You're back.
So back to
Oh.
So back to the seed.
Okay.
For the seed, if I shake this seed head, oops, there's one seed, or crumble it, you can see that these seeds,
Say it one more time.
these seeds are so tiny. And your general rule with seeds is that
Not again. Go ahead.
you plant it in the ground.
Let everybody know it's cutting out.
Sorry, it's cutting out.
Okay.
So this seed is so tiny that I can just put it on the top of my soil and shuffle it just a little bit and it'll be fine.
Go ahead.
It won't be able to get the light that it needs or the other things that it needs to grow. And then I would just make sure the soil stays damp. That was a lot of water. Spritzer bottles can help. And you'll notice that I'm planting in a salsa container. When you're doing seeds, you don't need wonderful, donated, fancy, handy to use single pots. You can use almost any container. Like I said, this one plant single serve yogurt cups as the starter pot. So don't need anything fancy. This is a salsa container and it will hold my new Tulsi or holy basil plant really happily until it gets big enough that I can put it into the ground. Holy basil, Tulsi, Vana is really happy in Florida sandy soil. If you want to start it in soil with a little bit more nourishment, it will.
Go ahead.
If you choose to put it in a container that's not necessarily designed for growing plants, you just want to make sure that you're not creating mud. So if I'm keeping this outside and there's a chance of rain, I want to make sure I put little holes in the bottom so that any extra moisture can come out. Those seeds are really tiny, and so I probably wouldn't let it just sit out in the rain, because those big raindrops would be like smash and move those tiny seeds out of the way, and seeds really have to stay in one spot. Okay? So that's growing from seed. Once you have your beautiful Tulsi, holy basil plant producing leaves, it is a plant that really is a so it will produce more leaves. Use the same thing that you were thinking of when you were taking a cutting, but the opposite direction when you're taking a cutting that you're going to just take from the plant to utilize in your tea or your honey that we'll go over in a minute. So, say hi, plant. Thanks for smelling so great. And then you'll find a spot that feels right, and you'll cut above a place that looks like it's going to grow. So, like here, I have these fresh new leaves. So I'm going to cut right above that, and I'm going to have a new stem come from that spot. Good thing to remember when you're cutting vines or things in your yard that you don't want to grow back. Cut below that. Okay? So I have my wonderful Vana, sweet smelling, eugenol, foot rich, Tulsi, and I'll hang it to dry. And in some herb books you might find that they suggest putting on a blanket in the shade, and well, if we do that in Florida, we would come back to a moldy mess probably. So I like to take it inside and hang it up on a line in our utility room where our dryer lives, where it has an AC vent to make sure there's air movement. I don't need to put this one in the dehydrator or even use a stove method of dehydrating, because there isn't very much moisture in the leaves. It will hang to dry out relatively easily. I just need to make sure that there's airflow. And airflow means between the leaves. I've seen, sometimes you see in herb pictures, they're beautiful apothecaries, you'll see herbs that are bundled and tied. Those have been dried in a way that means that there's no moisture trapped in there. Sometimes if you bundle them, the moisture will get trapped in. So be mindful of that. You want to make sure you're letting all the moisture go out. And once that wonderful plant has had a chance. It usually takes 24 to 48 hours for it to get crispy, and you'll know when you grab a leaf and it's crispy. And then I crumble it. I don't typically store stems. If I were making tea right now, I might take this and put it into my jar. But when I'm storing it, I typically just take the leaves and crumble them into my jar. From experience, I usually put the lid on my jar of that nicely dried tulsi, and I leave it on a counter where I'll see it, because if any moisture forms on my jar, I can just open it up and let the drying process continue. If you don't have a great place to hang it, or if you live with other people or some situation where it's harder for you to hang herbs, even though this smells amazing, and you might want to just hang a bundle like this in your shower because it smells really good and reminds you to breathe deeply. You can also take the leaves off and put them on a tray that has airflow through it. Sometimes dehydrators will have trays that are much like a screen. You can also use a window screen as long as it's clean, and let it air dry that way. So the dried leaves go into the jar. That's it for growing. Now, using it. My favorite way to incorporate tulsi or vana into my life is making a tea. And it tastes really good to me. It's really quick to add hot water to 1 teaspoon of herb per cup for the dried, or 1 tablespoon per cup for the fresh. And then I just put it in my jar. I usually muddle it, really get those leaves to open up. The plant cell is kind of hard on the outside, so you want to make sure that you give it a chance to really let some of those delicious tulsi, adaptogen, antiviral, antimicrobial aspects of the plant free. Okay. And then I would just add hot water, carefully, not burning myself, and let it steep for about 15 minutes. And then strain with my favorite straining device and enjoy. That's one way. You can also find holy basil or tulsi through your favorite and respected and trusted tea blend companies. Here is just one. I have no affiliation with this one. This one's really easy to find, so sometimes for people who are a little more apprehensive about growing or want to keep their plants for the pollinators but still want to have access, there are online resources. Mountain Rose Herbs would carry it. Our local Leaves and Roots would have it. But you could also find products like this online so that you have access to a tea bag.
First question, if you want it.
Oh, there's a question. What's the question?
It says, sorry hard to see, but are we keeping the flowers with the muddled tea leaves for tea making?
Yes. So flowering tops are what I usually use for flowering tops, so that I don't always use you may have seen me pull out some things. I don't typically use the really dried flowers that have mostly the seeds, but flowering tops where the top hasn't quite gotten to that seed hard spot yet, I'll use that. I use all of this. Okay?
Thumbs up.
So the thing about box teas, though, is that you just want to remember it's been in there a while. And so if you are incorporating this into your life, and then you come to my house for dinner and I serve you Tulsi, it might taste a little different. So come over for dinner so you get a sense of what it's supposed to taste like. Then after tisane or a cup of tea, my next method, I don't know if it's my second favorite, but my next method of using it is popsicles, man. Pretty much any herbal tea, any tea that you make, makes a really good popsicle, especially Tulsi or holy basil, Vana, that has these wonderful antiviral properties to it with an affinity for the respiratory system. It can be really nice if you're not feeling well or you have a chest cold or something else going on. It can be really soothing to have that popsicle in your life. My second favorite way of incorporating holy basil or Tulsi into my life is herbal honey. So with herbal honey, you want to start with a really clean, dry jar. I like to run them through the dishwasher with the, what's it called? The S word. I'm spacing on it. Where it's really clean. I know it's clean. It's been steamed. So with herbal honeys, you want to make sure, I like to use just the dried herb. So I start with any dried herb, but Tulsi is one of my favorite. In making herbal honey, you are making sure it's really dry. Just want to give that heads up. This jar I would probably not use in real life because it has a little moisture in the bottom. But for you, I wanted to show you. So this jar, clean, dry in the real world, would be filled halfway. In making honey, if it's for people who maybe aren't accustomed to herbal honeys, I stick with whatever the jar is, about a quarter. If I want to get all the properties of the plant into the honey, then I move it up to closer to a half the jar. So this is herbal honey. It's really similar to making a tincture, but you get honey. So any jar, you're filling up a quarter to a half with dried plant material, and then you're filling up the jar with honey. You're covering all that plant material with your honey. You're using the back end of a spoon and you're making sure there's no pockets of dried plant material that can possibly do funky stuff, especially in Florida. And then you have it, this is an herbal honey. You can see that it's filled. There's no spot on the bottom that has just little pockets of plant material. It's all honey. And I'm going to turn this every day from 2 weeks to 6 weeks. 2 weeks if I'm just going for the flavor. And then to turn it is like this. That's it. I leave it in a place that I'll notice it, so I can flip it. It's usually on the counter in my kitchen. In some herb books, you'll see the recommendation to put it in the sun or like a windowsill. And that's fine, I believe, if you are maybe in Vermont, but I find the sun in Florida is a little intense, so it really depends on the window. You don't want to put too much heat. Those bees worked really hard for that honey to have all those great nutrient benefits and antimicrobial properties by itself. If you heat it up too much, you lose some of that. So herbal honey. Any other questions?
Can it be planted and grown indoors?
Yeah, so planted and grown indoors. So there are plants that are happy with a more regimented life, that of living inside. And there are plants that really like a wild life. They like to be outside, they like to be able to grow freely, and I find Tulsi to be similar to that. And it might be that for a really long time, people have grown it outside by their door, and many traditions hold it to be sacred and used near their front door so that it is protecting in some way. So I don't know if it's because this plant is just accustomed to that life, but I have grown it temporarily in pots. I haven't had as much success in pots, but it is in the mint family. And typically when people say, hey, I've never grown anything before, I need to grow it inside, what should I grow? If they have enough light, it's really about the light, that's really important. I suggest plants in the mint family, like peppermint, sometimes lemon balm. And those plants really need moisture and room to grow. So whatever pot you pick, just make sure that you know that whatever the biomass or the amount of the plant above the ground is the same below the ground. So if I had this plant in this pot, it would really be growing out of that, because as you can see, the biomass is a little more than this, but the biomass is almost bigger than that pot. So just make sure that whatever pot you have it in, it could be happy there. Keep it moist, but not sitting in water. It's not a swamp loving plant. It's more of a moisture loving plant. So the middle of the yard in Florida where it gets rain, that's fine, but it wouldn't be happy next to a creek bed. So if you have it inside and you have a saucer under it, you're going to water it once a week, keep the soil moist after the seeds are sprouted. Until the seeds have sprouted, you're going to keep the soil moist. After the seeds have sprouted and you have a nice little plant, you're going to water it like once a week, and you're going to watch the tray underneath and make sure that there's not water standing in it. I know a lot of people like to keep that standing water because they feel like the plant's going to get all the moisture they need. But sometimes for plants, especially plants that really would prefer to be outside, that can feel really stagnating or slow down the process. So I'd recommend making sure there isn't water standing in that saucer or tray. Even though you're doing a great job of protecting all of your furniture, you want to make sure that you're letting the plant release the water it doesn't need, and then just water it again. Okay? Question?
Do you filter the herbs out of the honey before you use it?
Oh, that's a really great question. So filtering the herbs out of the honey really depends on who's eating it. So for me, I would leave the herb in it because I like having that green stuff on whatever I'm eating. And I might spread a little bit of Tulsi honey on a cracker because I need a snack. And it has the green in it, has a little sweet. I might use it to replace anything that would be like jelly, like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I might use my herbal honey for that, but that's for me. If I'm giving it to a friend that maybe doesn't have the same relationship with having green things in their life and little bits in their honey, I would definitely strain it out. To strain it out, you would start with something that has holes that are smaller than whatever the plant material is. You can see that the plant material is pretty small, and these holes are small enough to be able to strain that out, to help you with that.
Takes a long time.
It does take a long time. So Brian chimed in that it takes a long time, and really the honey is super thick, and if I know I'm going to strain it, then I go with that smaller amount to make sure there's less to strain out. The bits can be small. So if you're straining it out, You can start with whatever filter that you have for your teas. I've also used coffee filters. So the paper or even the metal coffee filters, put on the top of a jar. Okay. And then pour in the honey and give it time to a really long time to strain out. And then you're left with your honey at the bottom. And sometimes I will do things like add a smaller size jar. Inside that I want my honey to go into when I'm straining, and just use it to catch it.
Can get messy.
Well, it can get messy. It can. That's part of the fun, right?
Stay hydrated. You're 40 minutes in.
Perfect. Okay? So, the last recipe I have for today, and if you're really into nourishing foods and ways of incorporating plants into your life, check out this week. There's a class called Nourishment for Healthy Families that will be a lot like this on Wednesday or Thursday evening to find out more recipes. But this final recipe for Tulsi, always time for questions, but this final recipe for Tulsi, I use either or both fresh or the dehydrated Tulsi to make pesto. So pesto is in, Tulsi or Osum sanctum and this Vana variety are related to basil. So the flavor is really similar. If you have the Vana variety, the flavor is a little bit closer to that licorice that I mentioned. So balancing that out in your pesto can be really nice to use things like pumpkin seeds, lots of garlic, olive oil. And the way that I make that is I either take those fresh leaves and make the whole thing in a food processor, or if I'm in a hurry and I've just made some wonderful Vana Tulsi tea, I'll take the rehydrated plant material, so I use it to make tea, and I will add it, I'll put it into a bowl. I'll add garlic, olive oil, hemp hearts, and any other herbs that I'm thinking about into the bowl, and I'll stir it up, and I'll eat that or add it to pasta or sandwiches in a really similar way that you would make pesto. Use pesto. If I'm making it for other people, I would go through the process of putting it into a food processor. Question.
Back to the honey. Can you use the strained leaves for tea before you dump it?
Absolutely, I always do. It's really tasty too. I hardly ever put honey in my tea, so it's really nice to have sweet tea now and again. Any more questions? Wish you were all here so I could give you a little cutting of Tulsi to take home and let you sample that delicious herbal honey, and then enjoy a snack.
That can drive by and come and get some.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. Thanks for taking your time. Breathe deep. And we'll see you next time.